This brings us to the art of former slaves. Now, slavery is incredibly common in Rome. Basically, if you own a car today, you probably would have owned a slave in Roman times. That's how common it was. Basically, everyone but the very poorest people will have at least one slave. And slaves were often freed. And one of the first things they often did was go out and buy their own slaves. Kind of an odd cycle from our perspective, but remember, this is not slavery like we see in the American South. This is slavery where you can make money, you can buy your own freedom, and usually it's not hereditary. Just because you're a slave doesn't mean your children will be. And oftentimes they'll gain freedom not only from purchase, but also if the master dies. Now, according to the law, slaves could not be depicted in art, which means the first thing you do after you buy your own slave is probably get yourself depicted in art as a freedman. And that's what we're going to see here, starting at the top with the Funerary Relief. And this is a relief that will have been part of a sarcophagus or tomb. And what we're seeing is on the two sides, we see two brothers. And those two brothers were slaves. The man in the middle was their master, and he had freed them. Which is very interesting because you wouldn't think they would be depicting their master on their own tomb, but they do, because in Roman society, if you freed your slaves, you were required to become their patron. You had to take care of them. They became your client. And so you were expected to help pay for them. You were expected to help them move into the life of a freeman. So this is commemorating their new status. And the inscription that you can just barely see along the bottom actually tells us who they are. This idea of funerary art in Rome is very, very important. They like funerary art. They're taking that tradition primarily from the Etruscans. And we're going to see sarcophagi created quite frequently as well. And those sarcophagi, again, are taking ideas primarily from the Etruscans. Now, at the bottom, that is there because this is how slaves are depicted in art when they're slaves. You notice all of the slaves here look identical. There's no individual characteristics. And that's to avoid depicting a individual specific slave in art. Now this brings us to Roman coins. The Romans are very interesting people. They're the first society in the West to depict living people on coins. And this starts with our friend Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar is the first to put out a coin with his own likeness on it. Prior, this was seen as being in poor taste. You would only put ancestors or gods on coins. But Caesar sees it as with a different possibility. He sees this as propaganda. On the face of it, we suddenly can show everyone in the empire what Caesar looks like. And of course, very few people in the empire know what he looks like, but you look at the coins and you know. It's the same as today when you look at money, you're reminded of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Alexander Hamilton or whoever else. On the back side would have been a symbol, usually with a saying, and it would be something like, with Caesar you get more grain, or something like that. It would be a very political statement. So they are using this as propaganda, and as propaganda that circulates the empire and passes through everyone's hands at some point. You'll also notice that Caesar looks older than he actually was at this point. If you look at his neck, it's got that look like either he's trying to wear a Steve Jobs turtleneck or he's got a horrific case of turkey neck. And you see there's almost wrinkles that they're trying to bring into the face, but they don't quite match with the rest of the face. That's because they're artificial. He's still using the ideas of verism in the depiction on his coin. But remember, this is the Republic, so he's we're sort of at a transition at the very end here with Caesar. Now, we also can use coins to find out what people actually looked like in ancient Rome. This is Cleopatra. Now, Cleopatra would not have been that attractive of a woman. I'm sorry, Elizabeth Taylor, but it is the case. She was a Ptolemy, one of the rulers of ancient Egypt, and for 10 generations, that family inbred, sister marrying brother, father marrying daughter, half-sister and half-brother, cousins, etc. for 10 generations. You can imagine what would happen there. And so we see what we think is a very accurate depiction of Cleopatra at the time right here, which kind of makes you wonder how other people might look on a coin.